Welcome to the second part of our first review, review 1.1. We'll be starting things off with our rhythm warm-up by exploring 3/4 time. We will also continue our 2-5-1 progression exercise, but this week we'll be looking at A, E, and B. And last but not least, we will be taking a look at the theme song for the Piano Dojo. It's actually a reharmonization of a very small classical tune called Carefree that we actually saw in week 2 of my original series. So today we're going to take a look at how you can use 2-5-1s not only to add harmony to a simple song like Carefree, but also have one layer of abstraction more so that we can get a little bit smoother and more hip or sophisticated sound out of those 2-5-1s. As always, if you find these useful, please subscribe or even share this with anybody who is looking for answers about the piano. You can always visit my website where you can find all of this music, all of my show notes, and much more. So without further ado, let's head over to the drum and get rhythmically warmed up. Welcome to rhythm warm-up number 44. We're exploring 3/4 time today, and remember that if you ever need to review how these exercises are actually done, you can find the explanation and walkthrough in the description below. We're going to be starting at 60 BPM today, and our metronome is going to start with all 3 of our downbeats. So we're going to be looking at line 1, starting with our right hand on top and our left hand on bottom. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and 1 and 2, 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. Switch. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 and 1 and 2, 3 and 1 and 2 and hands together. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 and 1 and 2, 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. For line 2, we're going to speed up and we're going to cut out 2 of our metronome beats. So let's speed up to about 66 BPM, and we will only be using the metronome to locate the first beat of each measure, just the one. So we're going to actually cut the metronome in a third, and we're going to put it at 22 BPM. So the metronome is at 22. We are a little faster now at 66. We're going to be looking at line 2, and the metronome is going to symbolize the first downbeat of every measure. Let's give this a try. One, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Top line. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. For line 3, we have a steady stream of eighth notes, which is a perfectly legitimate rhythm that every musician is going to have to hold down at some point. So we are going to now speed up to 72 BPM, which means we'll be cutting our metronome down to 24 BPM. The metronome click will now represent the second downbeat of every measure. So let's go ahead and give our line 3 a try. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Top on hands together. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You know, I really enjoy playing rhythms like that because you can really feel yourself fluctuating, and I could even sense a few times where I was speeding up and then maybe trying to pull it back. And it's such a micro feeling, right? There's a lot of nuance to playing solid streams of rhythms like eighth notes, quarter notes, 16th notes, because you can do a lot with the flux of that steady rhythm. For line 4, we're going to speed up to 78 BPM. We're going to put our metronome down to 26 BPM, and it is going to represent the third downbeat of every measure. Let's go ahead and get started with our right hand on top and our left hand on bottom, line 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Top line. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Let's head back to the piano for the rest of our lesson. The 2-5-1 exercise is going to be exactly the same as we did last week, except this week we'll be looking at it in A major, E major, and B major. Now look, you might say, hey, but the review is still written in C, and that is because we only want to write it down in one key or not write it down at all. The most important thing that we do with these exercises is transpose them into all 12 keys on our instrument and actually do it. So what I will do with you in just a second is walk through this exercise on the keyboard, and I hope you'll do that along with me in the key of A, in the key of E, and in the key of B. Let's do it. Let's start in A major. That means we're going to be on a B minor 7 for our 2, an E dominant 7 for our 5-7, and an A major 7 as our 1. We're going to be using B Dorian, E Mixolydian, and A major 7. And when we put that all together, it's going to look like this. B minor 7, E dominant 7, A major 7. Let's take a look at E major 7. That means that we're going to start on an F sharp minor 7. Then we're going to inversion blend that to our B dominant 7. And then we're going to end on our E major 7. We're going to use the F sharp Dorian scale. Then we're going to have our B Mixolydian, and then our E major. So all together that's going to look like this. F sharp minor 7, B dominant 7, E major 7. And last but not least, let's check out B major. Now that means we're going to start on a C sharp minor 7. And I'm going to do it up here because honestly down here, it's starting to get a little low. It's below our middle C, so I would rather be above middle C. I kind of like the higher notes. Okay, so we're going to start on our C sharp minor 7. We're going to inversion blend that to F sharp dominant 7. And then we're going to inversion blend that to B major 7. Okay, our modes are going to be C sharp Dorian, and then F sharp Mixolydian, and then B major 7. All together that's going to look like this. C sharp minor 7, F sharp dominant 7, B major 7. So here is Carefree in its original form, okay? It is pretty basic, and let's just remind ourselves of what the harmony of Carefree is. Here we had our 1, we had another 1 in first inversion, which is going to be really important in just a minute. Then we had our 5, and we had our 1. So what our harmonic tension did is we built tension until we got to our ultimate peak at the 5, we returned to our 1, and we did that again down here on the second line. Technically, this is 2 complete cadences that begins and ends on 1, so it's kind of like 2 complete sentences working together. Now what we want to do is we want to see how do we add some harmony to this And my first idea, before I even start digging in to the actual possibilities, is that I would like to put 2 chords for every measure. Okay, so I would like every measure to have 2 chords. I already know that one of those chords is going to be my 1, and so I just need to come up with some other ones, and let's go ahead and start right here in the middle. Okay, so we're going to be looking at what could we possibly do right there, and I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the ambiguity of our first inversion 1. The way that this piece is set up as written is that although we have a B and a D here, it kind of looks like a B minor or the minor 3, right? But we're still calling it a 1, and the reason is because as written, these measures right here, these notes are still ringing in our ears when we hear these. So because of the context that we hear the notes in its original form, it sounds like just a modified 1, a destabilized 1. But what if we really did dig into that idea of the minor 3? What would that allow us to do? Well, let's take a look on the circle of fifths. If G is our 1, and B is our minor 3, then that takes us away from our tonal center, but not so far that you can't create a nice little walk back. If we utilize 2 5 1s, we could call this the 2 and the 5 of A, right? So that's like the 2 5 leading to A. And then instead of going to an A major, we're going to go to an A minor since we're in the key of G. And that's going to be our 2 and our 5 back to our 1, okay? And guess what? If we look at the chords that we just found, that's 4 chords. We needed 4 chords in those measures. So let's go ahead and plug those in and see how we can make that work. So here's what I'm going to call the partial reharmonization, okay? Now we just talked about these 4 chords, and in just a moment we'll talk about how we got this one. But before we do that, let's stay on our 2 5 1 logic, okay? So we had our 1, and then we jump to our minor 3 right here. And that allowed us to create this progression of 2 5 1s that led us ultimately back to the 1. Now, ultimately, when you do something like this, you can't just go slopping chords around without double checking and making sure that the original melody notes make sense in these harmonies, okay? We generally don't want to change the melody to fit the new chords. We generally want the chords that we choose to fit the melody. So let's investigate. We know that we have D and B minor, and D in B minor is the minor 3rd, so that check works out. Let's look at D in the key of E7. D is the flat 7 of E. So for our E7, this is a perfect note, okay? So far, so good. Now we have A's for A minor, and I think that's pretty clear that that works out. We have A's for D, which means that that's going to be the 5 of that chord, so that absolutely works out. And then, of course, we get back to our B on our G major, okay? So there we have it. We know that the chords and the melody work together, and the only thing left to do is to choose exactly how you want to voice those chords out. So before we get to that, I do want to mention this chord right here. In this measure with the 1, I didn't want to start a chain reaction of 2 5 1s. Instead, I kind of wanted to create a little jam session inside of the measure itself. And I think something that sounds really good to sort of rock back and forth between 2 chords is the 1 and the 4. You can never go wrong when you're rocking out between the 1 and the 4. And one of the reasons that I like that is because also they share a G, and therefore you can keep your G in the bass and you can have a little pedal tone action, and that is going to give you an even more sophisticated sound. So we sort of chose this chord because it doesn't change a lot, and it's just a nice chord to groove back and forth between within the measure itself before we actually create this little 2 5 1 journey, right? So it's like a groove, a journey, and a groove. You'll notice that in the second line, I didn't want to make it exactly the same. We know that this is technically 2 of the exact same harmonic progressions, but I wanted to add a little variation because if you have your groove here and you have your groove here, and then you groove it again, it almost sounds a little redundant at that point. So what I wanted to do at the beginning of the second line was to substitute out a chord right here. And what I did is I used the relative minor of C, which is A. That's a perfectly justifiable substitution. And look what it does to our bass line. It lets us step up from G to B before we start our jumping around our 2-5-1 progression. When it came to choosing how I wanted to play these chords, you'll notice that in the left hand I use a lot of what we call open voicings, okay? We have the 1 and the 7, you have the 5 and the 3, which is a cool little voice leading groove right there, because remember, we are trying to maintain that pedal tone. But then you'll see again, we have the 1 and the 7, we have a 10th with a 5th in the middle, right? So you have the do, mi, and the so, but the mi is up an octave. And we're gonna do that a few times. There it is again, and here's the 1 and the 7. And then I did write out a little 16th note syncopated groove. You can kind of hear an interesting way that you could kind of rock back and forth between these two chords. Again, we're gonna have some 10th action, some 1 and some 7. So basically what you're seeing here is either a shell voicing of the 1 and the 7, or some sort of 10th voicing. And then at the end, of course, we're going to have our G major 7, we're gonna add the 9 and the 13, and we're gonna hold all of those out. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like on the piano. So now that we have our progression fleshed out with some 2-5-1s, let's smooth it out a little bit. You see, the thing about 2-5-1s is that their roots tend to jump back and forth in fifths, right? So you sort of have this leapy feeling where your bass is leaping to different tonal centers by a fourth or a fifth away from each other. And that does have a certain sound to it, and it's not the sound that I wanted here. What I wanted was more of a chromatic. I wanted my voices to kind of slide down a progression to create something a little more sophisticated and a little bit smoother. And so what we're going to do is we're going to utilize something that we have talked about before called the tritone substitution. If you need a review on what a tritone substitution is, I'll put a link in the comments, but very briefly, what we do is we can substitute a chord with another chord a tritone away. There are a few different ways to remember how to find the tritone. One is that it is 6 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Another way is to know that the tritone is in between fa and so. But my favorite way is to use the circle. On the circle, the tritone is exactly 180 degrees on the other side of the circle from the chord that you want to substitute. What we are going to do is we are going to tritone substitute our dominant 7th chords. So we are going to tritone substitute E, and we're going to find the tritone substitution for D. For E, our tritone substitution is going to be B flat, and for D, our tritone substitution is going to be A flat. So now, instead of using E and D, we're going to use B flat and A flat. Let's plug that into our arrangement and see what happens. So this is the full reharmonization, except that we have replaced our dominant 7th chords with our tritone substitutions. And now the only thing left to do is to justify that the melody note matches with the chord. Now we already know that the melody notes match with all the other chords because we haven't changed them at all. So let's just go ahead one at a time and look at these. So for B flat, we have a D in the melody, and B flat and D go together very well because D is the 3rd note of B flat. So yes, that works. And then for A dominant 7, we actually are going to get a very interesting color here, and we're going to dive into that in just a moment. All right, so this is an A flat dominant 7, flat 9, sharp 11. It sounds very scary until you take it apart. We will take that apart in just a moment, but let's take a look at what the tritone substitutions have allowed us to do in the bass first, okay? So before, what was happening was our bass notes were jumping around in fifths and fourths, but now what we have is we have a nice chromatic line that leads from the third all the way back down to our do. So we have this sort of like walk up and then slide down, and that is why the tritone substitution actually simplifies things, because it turns jumps of fourths and fifths into a simple, nice, smooth chromatic line, and it gives us that nice, sophisticated, almost jazzy sound. I have to admit, I did change one melody note. Like I said, generally you don't want to change the melody note. If you do have to change the melody note, maybe you want to stick with a chord tone, right? But I actually did, in this case, keep my B for one extra beat before I went up to the D. Usually you have two Ds right here, but it just needed to be done. My ear just did this and I liked it, and I said, hey, that's fair game here. So I did change one melody note, but I kept it in a chord tone. So I think that's the next best thing you could possibly do. Now, before we listen to this song on the piano, let's talk about A flat, dominant 7, flat 9, sharp 11. At first, that may sound like some advanced music theory terminology that you haven't learned yet. But remember, the whole theory of this Piano Dojo channel is that advanced music theory doesn't necessarily exist by itself. Instead, advanced music theory is taking basic concepts and putting them together in different ways. So if we frame it in a different way, we can easily achieve an A flat, dominant 7 with a flat 9 and a sharp 11. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to play an A flat in our bass. We're going to put the flat 7 above that in one of our typical shell voicings that we have throughout this piece. Now on top of that, instead of thinking about it as its altered tones, what if I said, can you play a B flat major 7? And then what I want you to do is sharp the 5. Okay, so we have a B flat major 7 with a sharp 5. However, we can actually break this down into even simpler terms if you really wanted to. You could say, play a D major triad, put a B flat underneath that, and then add an A flat dominant 7th shell, right? And so that whole thing would sound like this. There we have it, okay? So you may not be able to immediately find an A flat dominant 7, flat 9, sharp 11, but you could find a D major. You could put a B flat underneath that, and then you could play an A flat dominant shell. And guess what? Now you've got an A flat 7, flat 9, sharp 11. Now that we've got this piece fully reharmonized, let's go ahead and listen to what it sounds like on the piano. There you have it. That is how I fully reharmonized Carefree and created the basis for the Piano Dojo theme song. Of course, if you want to listen to the extended cut of that, please check out the Piano Dojo Originals playlist. Again, that goes a little further than what we did today because that involves some improvisation, it involves some grooving on different patterns and whatnot, and maybe in future episodes we can address those, but today we really just wanted to stick to how did we add the harmonies to that piece to make it sound more sophisticated using 2-5-1 logic, all right? As always, if you find these useful, please subscribe or even share this with anybody who is looking for answers about the piano. You can always visit my website where you can find all of this music, all of my show notes, and much more. And until next time, happy practicing.